Good evening. We're going to start the evening with a karakia, and I've got some Venture Taranaki staff who are going to lead us off.
Ko ranganui etu ihone, ko papatunuku etakato akine. Arahina mai mato e roto I o kurua kurua airaha. Moa ki tonu, tihe mauri ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Taranaki te mawanga, ko Waiaka te awa, no Taranaki aho, ko Joanna Brea toko ingawa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Haere mai, and welcome to this evening. My name is Joanna Brea. I am actually the chair of Venture Taranaki, and it gives me great pleasure this evening to be the chair of our panel session for the Taranaki 2050 Energy Conversation. Welcome to all of you in what I hope will be a good evening. On the screen down here that you can't see, we have a number of members who are online. So welcome also to all of you. Hopefully you can see all of us and you can hear us. If you can't, please send something in on the chat and we'll deal to it. So why are we here tonight? Well, in 2018, the government at the time chose to stop awarding all exploration blocks for our oil and gas industry at the time. And Taranaki being the region that we are, we decided to do something about this. We wanted to keep Taranaki the great region that we know, we love to work, play, and visit and enjoy. So a group of people got together, and Venture Taranaki then took the lead on what we developed as Taranaki 2050 Roadmap. And that was all about getting Taranaki to be a low emissions economy, but retaining the great work of the great people and the great livelihood that we endure today. We also wanted to bring along the people who are not so lucky as to have such a great lifestyle and try to improve that for those people. So with that, the Taranaki 2050 Roadmap was spawned, and it was about building a roadmap for the low emissions economy, but building a roadmap through working with the local community. And there were thousands of people who were involved in co-creating the Taranaki 2050 Roadmap, which also aligned to the strategy that was held at the time by the Economic Development Agency, Venture Taranaki, which was Taparai Roa. Now, out of that were 12 roadmaps, one of which was the energy roadmap. And some of you may be familiar with the documentation, but for those of you that weren't, there were a number of action items that were put forward as suggestions of ways in which we could get to a low emissions economy. And with that low emissions economy roadmap and those action items, over the last 3 to 4 years, a lot of work has been carried out. For example, the development of Araaki, which is our National New Energy Development Centre. That is now in full flight. And in fact, my backup today, if I should have had COVID, was going to be Jonathan Young, who is actually working there at the moment. We also have the hydrogen roadmaps that have been developed over the time. And now we obviously have Hiringa, and we're supported today by Amelia from Hiringa Energy for developing hydrogen as a possible fuel source for powering boats, trucks, planes, who knows? We'll find out more about that today, no doubt. We also have had a number of offshore energy forums. The last one was an absolute fabulous 2-day event, which we had Megan Woods. She did Zoom in, but she did turn up and she did talk to us about how she would change legislation to enable offshore wind. We also heard about other forms of offshore energy. And for any of you that ever doubted that we couldn't do some of this, that conference was absolutely amazing, with great people from overseas who were able to impart much offerings to us of what we could do here in Taranaki. So that's really what we've been doing on the energy front. But today, what we want to do is really promote a bit more conversation with you as the audience to find out you know, what our panelists, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, actually know about what we could do in the future. And we'll also be looking to you guys to come up with some questions for them as we go through this evening. And you can antagonize them, ask them questions nicely or however you want to, and see what you can get out of them with regards to where we're going in the future. The idea, though, is for us to have a conversation this evening, that we can ask questions of each other and see where we're really going. So I'm going to introduce the panelists right now, and I will have to read from a script, otherwise I may get it wrong, so bear with me one moment. So on my far left here, we've got Jacob Snelgrove, who's part of Air New Zealand's sustainability team with a focus on future zero emissions aircraft. This work encompasses technology across hydrogen, battery and hybrid platforms, as well as understanding the enabling infrastructure required to support these future aircraft. So welcome, Jacob. Just next to me, we have Professor Nicola Gaston. She's a professor in physics at the University of Auckland, where her research group conducts quantum mechanical stimulations of the electronic and thermodynamic behavior of nanoscale materials, aiming to find new ways of making materials that address issues of sustainability. She's going to comment on it, I can tell, just the way she's looking. Whether addressing issues of energy or sustainability or designing materials to become more sustainably synthesized and indeed recycled. She's also the co-director of the MacDiarmid Institute for Advanced Materials and Nanotechnology, a New Zealand Centre of Research and Excellence. So welcome, Nicola. Great to have you. And last but not least, sitting in the middle is Amelia Rentzios, recently joined Hiringa, as I mentioned earlier. She's head of operations as the company launches New Zealand's first hydrogen refueling network and the first of their Power to X projects, which has certainly been something that Venture Taranaki have been involved in. Amelia's background includes leadership roles in the oil and gas operations, both internationally and here in New Zealand. She also sits on the board of the New Zealand Young Energy Professionals Network and co-founded the Taranaki Young Energy Professionals chapter in 2018, with the goal of promoting and discussion and education around the energy transition. So it would be great if we could give a round of applause to our panelists, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to ask some questions and then at the end we're going to open the floor. So I've got between 7 and 10 questions to ask them. And if you can just be thinking of some of the questions that you'd like to ask. But before we do, one of the panelists has asked me if we could just have a show of hands of the people in the room that are actually working in the energy industry anywhere in New Zealand at the moment. It would be really useful to the panelists. Okay, that's great. So for those of you on Zoom, I got about a third to 50% of the people are actually from the energy industry. I'm going to sit down now. Hope that's okay with you. So let's kick it off. Amelia, well, let's start with you as you're sitting in the middle there. So given your varied background that I've just talked about, what do you think the world's energy mix might look like in 2050?
Can everyone hear me all right? Speaking like this? Yep. I think in order to answer this question, because it's a big question, what does the world's energy mix look like? I think it's really important to kind of leave behind everything that we know about the New Zealand energy mix at the moment, because the world energy mix right now is so incredibly different to what New Zealand's is. 80% of the thermal energy comes from fossil fuels. I think it's only 10% of renewables is coming from, what 10% of electricity generation is coming from wind and solar. So it's an incredibly different mix to what we're experiencing here in New Zealand. So if you're looking at 2050, yeah, in order to achieve like a 1.5 degree sort of goal of what we're looking at, there's many different scenarios, but ultimately what it has to look like is, 90% of our electricity generation coming from renewable sources. So that's a massive transition away from fossil fuels. that's an increase in solar, an increase in wind, offshore wind, hydrogen, all different forms of renewables. And I also think if you look at industry, that's quite a large transition of industry usage of energy, and like the majority of the transition for that to come from renewables as well. I guess the other part of that is transport as well, if you're sort of looking at it in 3 blocks, and that also has to absolutely change. And what I found really interesting was reading recently, something like only 5% of cars that are sold globally at the moment are EVs, but by 2050, that's absolutely going to change, or going to have to change. If you look at the number of new cars that are sold right now that are internal combustion engines, the way that we run our cars, they're likely to still be on the road in the late 2040s. So those are also going to have to transition, and yeah, there's going to have to be a real change in behaviors around that. So around transport, yeah, electrification, hydrogen obviously makes sense as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to look at either Nicola or Jacob. Anything else you'd like to add? Nicola.
So the fun thing about panel discussions is you have to change your answer depending on what the person before you said. So there's 2 things I'd like to pick up on there, which are not what I was planning to say, but it's the good thing about these conversations, is that firstly, the international thing, that the international mix is really different. That's really true. But I think one of the interesting things for me in the last few years has been to reflect on how much that is changing. You know, we've been very, I will say, smug for a long time in New Zealand about how much renewable we have. And the cost of solar and wind internationally is just plummeting. You know, there are a lot of countries that are going to be right up there. That competitive advantage is something we might lose in some sense unless we use it smartly. So that would be my first sort of reflection on the international stuff. The second thing, because I run a material science institute, and I used to have to talk quite a lot about how material science was innately connected to energy sustainability, because we make, you know, you make photovoltaic materials, or you make materials that are the chips in computers, and that all determines how much energy you use. And so everything energy related comes down to the materials that you use to manipulate that energy, whether it's fuels or batteries or something else. And I used to have to explain that a little bit. I don't think I do anymore, because I think it's inherent, and also what came through in Amelia's answer is that when we talk about energy, we're also talking about carbon. You know, we're talking about a material, a physical substance. And so the sustainability of everything on this planet is kind of restricted by the fact that the planet is finite. You know, everything that we've got on it is here in particular quantities. And unless you're talking about radioactive elements, and we're not, or iridium, which does fall occasionally onto the planet in the form of asteroids, those are the only sort of elements that really change their composition. And so we do have to learn to live sustainably as material scientists. And so when we talk about energy, we're talking about carbon. And that's the big shift, I think, in what we're going to be doing in future.
Thanks, Nicola. That's great. Jacob, did you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I mean, just seeing the hands come up earlier, I'm not going to claim to be an energy expert. I'll stick to my answers to being really a microcosm around aviation, but I think it offers an interesting, I guess, view when we look to decarbonising the airline out to 2050. Today, we rely on a imported source of energy, namely Jet A1, that powers our entire fleet. As we look towards 2050, that is no longer a single source of energy for us. We might still be drawing on a limited amount of Jet A1. We're going to be using imported sustainable aviation fuels. We're going to be using locally produced sustainable aviation fuels. We'll be using electric aircraft that are drawing grid electricity, requiring the scale up of renewables that's already been mentioned. And I think you're right in identifying that it's easy to promote New Zealand's great 80% mix of renewables, and we do that a lot when we're talking to international partners, but it's not what we're doing today. It's what we're going to be doing in 30 years time. That sort of comes back as the critique, and that is definitely something that we've highlighted. And then finally, that other energy mix for us is going to be hydrogen. So no longer are we drawing on one energy source, it's going to be a mixture of multiple. So yeah, just from in the aviation sense anyway.
Great, thanks. And you can see that we're going to have lots of different opportunities available to us, is my take from that. So Nicola, you're doing lots of research work. And I think for us here in, Taranaki, what do you think that the average Taranaki household might look like in terms of energy use for the planes, maybe not trains, well, yeah, a bit trains for us, but automobiles and powering our homes by 2050? What do you think it'll look like for us here?
Yeah, it's a dreadful thing trying to make predictions. But there are some things that are pretty straightforward. I think the general lowering of cost of renewables internationally, having electricity decarbonised is not going to be that hard. So, green electricity is going to be a thing, which is great. Transport's going to be harder. Manufacturing is going to be harder, but that's something that tends to be invisible to the average person. And so I think actually the things that are going to be hardest are the things that are invisible. And maybe if you want an example that is household specific, the best example might be to go back to thinking about the industrial transition when people first had automation of household tasks. So thinking about the invention of the washing machine, and economists will tell you that washing the clothes in a household took on average a day a week of full-time labor, right? That's a lot of work. And so replacing that with it's a lot of work. Nobody wants to wash their clothes by hand. And so, you replace that by a washing machine and suddenly that labor becomes invisible. And especially there's an equity thing here. If some people have access to that technology and others don't, then the differential in labor required is massive. And so that's really one of the things that I think we have to look out for in the future when we look at the relative energy cost of changes. Firstly, that things can be invisible. And so by invisible, what I mean is that there is a carbon cost every time you Google something on your iPhone. And I don't mean the battery cost, that your battery loses energy by a tiny amount. That's nothing. So how much is a litre of fuel these days? It changes every day, but it's like, let's go with $3. I know it's slightly less, I think, at the pump right now, but fingers crossed it won't be more than that tomorrow.
Depends if you live in Auckland or not, which you do.
And so a litre of fuel could power your iPhone for about 3 years. Yep. So energy differentials are really big things in terms of how much labor it would take to do that in alternative forms. The other fun fact is that when you weight up the amount of labor a particular person can do, and so this is relevant to the washing machine example, it's about, so when you go to the pump and you put fuel into your car and you're putting it in per second, the amount of energy going into your car is the labor of about 60,000 people in the same amount of time, right? And so the energy differentials are massive. And what people have access to then can become really powerful and inequitable. So the washing machine example is one. If we were to update that for the modern world, what I would predict is going to be things like access to computation. So I mentioned the iPhone. Every time you Google, there's a carbon cost to that. At the moment, that's invisible and we just do it and we don't think very much about it. Pre-COVID, that carbon cost was competitive to the cost of international air travel, right? And so when we look at decarbonising a whole lot of different industries, and I know we're not here to talk about manufacturing particularly or about agriculture, construction and housing, but when you look at energy efficiency measures in a lot of those industries, a lot of those efficiency measures will come about because of artificial intelligence, machine learning approaches to optimizing processes. But all of that will have a computational cost. Yeah, so the good point, I'll try to end this on an optimistic note, is that one of the things that we're working on is really trying to make computational processes much more efficient by changing the way that we do computation, by looking at quantum computing, which is much more efficient for certain types of computation, by making materials that can manage information in the same way as the brain with sort of synapse-like connections, rather than manipulating electrons, which is really wasteful because if you move electrons, that produces resistance and that means heat, and so you're wasting energy. So there are lots of things going on to try to optimize processes, but most of the big gains are actually going to be invisible. They're going to be about energy efficiency in the way that we do things, rather than revolutionizing the way that we feel we're doing things, in my opinion.
So given what you've just said, I'm not going to let you put the microphone away now. So you've talked about computational, but you're doing all this research work up in Auckland, and it sounds really fascinating. I'm quite charged up about it. Are there any other minerals out there or things that we can use without giving away some, new research that you can't talk about, but what's out there that, we here in Taranaki would like to know about that, could be a bit of a game changer? What can you share with us?
Well, I might go back a quick step. 20 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, and I came across people who were working on hydrogen fuel cells for hydrogen cars, and it was all very challenging. And we know we can do it, but is it cost effective? Is it going to actually be, commercializable? And one of the big barriers is that you want platinum to really separate the hydrogen atoms in the molecules, combine them with oxygen to produce the water, which is the whole point of using hydrogen as a fuel, that you have this really clean byproduct. And platinum's really good at doing this. And so for years, people have been looking at combining different elements in the periodic table. And the really good news is that we've got 118 of them. So there are lots of different things, especially when you start using them in combination, that you can do. So cheap metals like nickel, you can combine some nickel with some carbon, and it acts pretty much like platinum. You can do this in various different ways, but yeah, there's a lot of work that's been done on this, and there's a lot of work looking at replacing expensive metals in these fuel cell components, or in batteries as well. We might talk about lithium batteries, which I think everybody sort of understands these days, that there's a bit of a problem about accessing lithium because you have to mine it, and it's in some quite geopolitically unstable parts of the world. We have access to an awful lot of alternatives in material science, and so that's where a lot of research is going. And what I'll say is that in the end, all you need is electrons that have the right quantum mechanical energy levels to do the thing. So it doesn't really matter what material you have, you just have to be smart about making it into the right form, and it's all doable. That's my optimistic conclusion.
Great, absolutely fascinating. I'm going to pass the baton on to Jacob, I think, if you don't mind. So Jacob, the other day I got an email from Air New Zealand all about NZ0. So those of us who are familiar to going all the way to the UK, like I am, we go on NZ1 and come back on NZ2, or vice versa. So now we've got NZ0, and apparently it's a journey, but it's not actually a flight at the moment. So perhaps you would like to share with us something about Air New Zealand with regards to your decarbonising your industry, given at the moment, as you mentioned in your briefing, you use A1 jet fuel, and it's obviously emitting carbon. So would you like to tell us what you're up to in Air New Zealand, what we can learn from you, please?
Yeah, and it's not a flight yet, but it hopefully will be soon. So yeah, last week we did go out public with a brand campaign, which we called Flight NZ0. But I think it's important to point out that to us, decarbonisation isn't a brand campaign, and it's not something that we're just doing for the good feel of it. Decarbonisation for us is, or climate change and the transition to a low carbon future, is the highest risk we have on our group risk register. Sits number one there with the board and the audit and risk committee. And so a growing amount of resource, both internally and financially, is going towards trying to solve this problem. So to us, there is both inherent risk transitioning to a low carbon economy, i.e., rising cost, changing consumer demand, but there's also increasing opportunity around new technology, changing the way that our network potentially functions today, which is kind of the exciting thing. So we, as a part of this Flight NZ0, released a decarbonisation roadmap, which was our pathway to net zero 2050, which was a goal we set in 2020. And what that looks at is drawing, as I sort of touched on before, multiple different energy sources and solutions to get to net zero by 2050. And what that will see for us predominantly is the reliance of biofuels, or SAF, or new power to liquid fuels that Amelia sort of might touch on later. And that to us is going to solve a large part of our international network. So today, or pre-COVID, 2019 days, which seemed like an age ago, 82% of our emissions came from international travel. And given the challenges with hydrogen and battery technology in the short term, the main decarbonisation lever for those flights is the use of sustainable aviation fuel. When we look to the other decarbonisation levers we see, the other pillar we had was the use of what we're calling zero emissions aircraft, and this could be both hydrogen or battery electric powered. And to us, this represents a really exciting opportunity for the airline to offer what is going to be predominantly a domestic product, because these aircraft are not going to be capable of flying long distances in the short term. But we see these planes being deployed right across the domestic network out to 2050. And if what is, like Amelia touched on earlier, if we can unlock the low cost of energy in transitioning these airplanes, then you could see regions better connected, increased frequencies, point-to-point routes that don't exist today start to emerge across the domestic network. And then not to be forgotten as well is the continued investment in a modern fleet, which is still ongoing. And then operational efficiencies is another key one for us, and it kind of touched on the point that Nicola made earlier about improving energy efficiency. And to us, that's going to be even more critical as we transition over to sustainable aviation fuel, which is going to come at a higher cost today than what Jet A1 would be. And then finally, it's the investment in carbon removal solutions as we get towards net zero 2050. In all likelihood, we're not going to get to zero gross. We're still going to have a net amount of carbon that we're going to have to remove from the atmosphere, and it's starting that work today so that we're not playing catch up by 2050.
Thank you. Nicola or Amelia would like to make a comment about decarbonising.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add that coming from a company that's looking to provide sort of the other perspective of enabling organizations to decarbonize, I think the what is obviously really important in the strategy, but it's also the how. And I think the how really requires strong partnerships between companies that want to decarbonize and companies that can support with the technology and the supply of fuels, for example. Certainly, we're starting to see that with the marine industry, looking at new tech with hydrogen fuel cells for boats. And that requires a huge partnership as well with hydrogen supply, for example, because I guess one of the challenges that's sort of typical in a new industry building is what we call kind of the chicken and the egg. And if you don't have you can create the demand, but the supply might not be there, or you can create the supply, but the demand might not be there. So if you're creating both of them at the same time by forming solid partnerships at the start, like in transport, heavy transport, marine, aviation, yeah, that's just really critical as to how we actually go about doing that.
Just on the direct air capture thing, because I think it's something that comes up quite a lot and that is very polarizing. I nodded a bit when Jake was saying that, because there's this long history actually of the concept of being able to take carbon out of the air, to be able to collect carbon dioxide and maybe sequester it in ground, bury it down in tanks somewhere, which is, I'm going to say, deeply problematic, and it has been used for many years as a reason to not address climate change immediately, because we will get better at doing this and then one day we will do it and it will solve all our problems. And so I am here not with two hats on, but I don't know which hat I'm wearing, or I'm on a fence, or there's some metaphor that I can't quite find. But there are two sides to this. One is that history of climate change denial associated with direct air capture is very real. On the other side, it's one of the research programs that we have as part of the Institute, is to use new materials to really pull CO2 out of the air, probably not in your general paddock somewhere, but probably in an industrial place where there's CO2 being produced. And you can make materials that will do this, that have like porous materials where the pores are just the right size and they have the right sort of electronic structure to attract CO2 and really pull it in. And then the idea is that you can maybe make these materials electronically active so that they can convert that CO2 into hydrocarbons by reacting the CO2 with hydrogen. That's a very hard thing to do. It's why it's on our 10-year plan, and we'll see what happens. But that's where some of the future sustainable fuels that might be most exciting might come from, is if we can figure out how to do this, pull CO2 out of the air and convert it back into the hydrocarbons that you burn to produce it. And so you'd be doing with hydrocarbons what we already can do with water, which is that you can split it, make your hydrogen, then you burn it, and then you go backwards and forwards from water and back to H and O. But there's this really tricky thing about direct air capture because it's been so politicized. And so it's just worth really spelling that out, that people are not wrong to be against it, because often it's because they have seen this political story of direct air capture being sold as a straw man solution. But at the same time, we probably can do it. The thing is just that it's always going to cost. And so the only way we can pay for it is if we can either create these fuels that will have value, which is what we're trying to do, or if we just put a big enough price on carbon that we can make it happen right now. And so I guess that's where I heard Jake coming from, which was good.
And it's a really good point too. And we have a sustainability panel that guides the airline, chaired by Sir Jonathan Porritt, who Jenny and I can both attest to when we brought up direct air capture with Sir Jonathan, who's a fierce climate activist. He fell off his chair and then proceeded to yell at us through the Teams meeting invite for a fair while. But it is a really valid point. And I think for us, and I think, again, I'm speaking about Air New Zealand, but I think more it's the global need to actually decarbonize your operations, if you're in operations or your business, through a gross means, and we get away from talking about net carbon emissions reduction goals, and doing what we are required to do to get the gross emissions out of the industry that we're in, to truly get towards a path to net zero 2050, if that's what we're aiming for. And understanding that carbon removal solutions are going to have to be a part of the puzzle at some stage at the appropriate time to solve the problem, which is actually achieving net zero for the hard to abate sectors. It's not an excuse. It's not a tool that we want to use as a delay mechanism at all. And we're soon, hopefully, to set a science-based carbon reduction target, which is entirely based on gross carbon reduction. And we see that as being hopefully a pathway for us to actually reduce real emissions down to 2050 in line with what's required to meet a 1.5 transition. But it's a good call out, and it's one that hopefully, if we can transition to power to liquid fuels as well, it actually becomes part of the energy solution rather than a deferral mechanism.
Well, thanks, panel, for that. Really interesting. And we're hearing diversity is required. It's going to be hard. It's going to be expensive. And and I know from looking at the people in this room that there are people here that are really trying very hard to come up with solutions to get to decarbonize in some way, and to be able to generate electricity and other forms of energy as cheaply as possible if we can. But it isn't going to be easy. So Amelia, you've just changed companies and you've chosen to stay here in Taranaki. I know your heart's here in Taranaki, which is great. And you know lots about Taranaki. What do you see as Taranaki contributing to supplying new energy sources, given your background in both the industry you were in and the industry that you are in? But other thoughts on other industries too will be great.
All right. Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, absolutely. My heart is here in Taranaki, and I had a Scottish colleague recently refer to it as the chosen land, because indeed it's full of just so many natural resources that we can harness, but also use to obviously decarbonize and transition. I think Taranaki has huge opportunities to enable more wind energy growth, to enable and unlock offshore wind, which, as you mentioned earlier, is a huge opportunity. Also grid scale solar. I think the first grid scale solar sort of development was done here in Taranaki as well, just recently for the country. Obviously there's the hydrogen, there's biofuels as well. So in terms of our resources that we can use, we've just got a massive opportunity to do that. How we do that, I think we're also really privileged in the sense that we have existing industry. So that comes with existing infrastructure, which we can, to a certain extent, capitalize on. It comes with talent, which we can also capitalize on. And I guess we'll hopefully discuss that sort of coming up. But certainly there's talent that's able to transition into and bring solutions to new energies. I think we're a really great, while we have a long way to go still, I think we're also a really great example of partnership with iwi and hapu. And I think that's absolutely critical as we develop into new energies as well, if we're going to be using these natural resources. So I think we can absolutely build on that. And also we have like a lot of really great startups here, and not just in the energy industry, but in the digital businesses who are looking to solve problems and digitize. And I think by 2050, as Nicola sort of mentioned before, there's going to be a huge amount of smart tech needed, because our behaviors aren't necessarily going to immediately change, but we'll need to have smarter tech to sort of help enable those behavior changes. And I really think that there's also a huge opportunity in Taranaki for businesses to either pivot or pick that up. So,
and you know, we've got energy companies here. What do you think their appetite is to actually transition to a low emissions economy? Do you think they're, you know, we're moving those that are here at the moment without you getting into any trouble with anybody?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this politically. I mean, I guess some background, and to be 100% transparent, and I think it's worth saying that is one of the reasons that I moved out of oil and gas was a slight frustration with the reluctance to change and decarbonize to the urgency that I felt was needed. So on that, I think that there is absolutely an appetite for change. I just don't think that the urgency is necessarily there to change fast enough. And I think that comes with a lot of risk. 100% understand where it comes from. Back during COVID time, obviously, when the oil and gas price, or the oil price plummeted, oil and gas companies or energy companies had to really stick to core business, because you're going to stick to what's going to keep making you money. You're not necessarily going to throw lots at delivering a new clean tech. But I think because of that, we're potentially a little bit on the back foot of moving. There are some quick wins, and sometimes you see that sort of happening, but those aren't going to make a huge change. Yeah.
But of course, you know, I suppose one of the reasons that people haven't shifted completely is because we have such a reliance on energy, and we're not generating it fast enough from the renewable forms. So, you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think we have so much capability to develop and to change quickly, that I think if you put your resources into that, you know, it could happen faster. Yeah.
But maybe this is a good question for Nicola. I mean, I feel that there must be some barriers out there that, you know, that's what's stopping people not move as quickly for whatever reason. So, you know, what would your comments be on the barriers that are holding people back from getting into being a low emissions economy or decarbonising, apart from the one you've already talked about taking carbon out of the air?
So there are a couple of things to say. I think the first one, which is just quick perhaps, is about the difficulty that we have in predicting the pace of change. And just, you know, a few years ago, I really wouldn't have expected to see as many electric vehicles on the streets as what we see now, right? I think that's changed really, really fast in the last little while. And in scientific systems, we talk about tipping points. And there are negative tipping points in the sense of the, you know, ice shelves in Antarctica sliding off into the ocean and raising water levels. But there are positive tipping points. And I think positive tipping points can happen, especially in social systems in this particular circumstance. I said before that I think everything is possible because we've got 118 elements in the periodic table, and we make nanostructures, and that changes everything. And so we can control so much about how we use materials. The physical science is really the easy part. What's hard is getting people to change behavior. And so I think Taranaki has, for me, it was interesting to listen to what Amelia was saying, because I think, I mean, I'm cautious talking about Taranaki as an Aucklander, sorry. But I will offer a naive opinion and you may correct me, which is just that it feels like it's a little bit of a microcosm of the rest of New Zealand. You know, there's a certain amount of cosmopolitanism. There's a fair amount of dairy. There's a fair amount of industry with the oil and gas, and it feels like Taranaki really has the ability to lead the country through this, to show what's possible. And that's, for me, I think that's why I'm here, why I think this is really interesting, what you're doing here. And the biggest thing that also Amelia pointed to was just the people here. And so I think, you know, skilled people who have the ability to work in companies that are working on developing technologies are a huge asset. And I think Taranaki has that far more than any other region of New Zealand that is going to be going through exactly the same challenges. So, you know, if you can't do it here, maybe that's my challenge for you. If you can't do it here, I think we need you to.
Yeah, well, that's a really great lead into my next question, which is around skills. So when we were building the Taranaki 2050 roadmap and trying to make ensure that Taranaki stayed as a great place to live, work and play, one of the concerns about, you know, the offshore exploration ban and change in energy was that we didn't want to lose this fabulous skill set that we've got here in Taranaki, whether it be in the oil and gas industry or whether it be in the associated industries. You know, the fact that we can build something like the Hiringa Bridge was a function of the fact that we have the engineering skills here to be able to do that. So I think my question now is to Jacob, because I'm sure that Air New Zealand has this problem. You know, how do we retain the great skill set that we've got here, and not only retain them, but attract more people into the new renewable industries and make sure we don't lose them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, it was just interesting talking to Amelia before about what wasn't apparent to me is the challenge already underway in the oil and gas sector around talent, or the loss of talent as people move out of what is, you know, could be termed a sunset industry, right? And for us, as I mentioned before, climate change and transition to a low carbon economy is the highest risk that business is dealing with, and it is going to dwarf the COVID pandemic when we look at its effects over the next 30 years. And one of the keys, or one of the big risks there is not just carbon, it's attracting people to what could be viewed as a future sin industry, when currently aviation is 2 to 4% of emissions globally, and over time that's going to increase as, you know, easier to abate sectors abate carbon, and we don't, or we can't as fast. So attracting talent is something that we are acutely aware of. It's not something we are dealing with now. Like, we are still able to attract talent well, but when we look at that emerging generation, the customer research we already do highlights that this generation cares more about climate change. They're prepared to act more around their feelings towards it. And so that is going to emerge absolutely as a talent risk over time. I think for the region, or Taranaki as a region, what's really exciting, I think, when I reflect on the opportunity here, is what we were talking about before. Incumbent businesses that are having to transition away have a lot of competing priorities around how they allocate capital and resource towards solving that problem. And a lot of them are paying back large research development investments in what would now be termed old technology, right? Whether that's, you know, new truck engines, whether that's new airplane engines, whether that's, you know, whatever the different sort of thermal energy or generation plant is. That's investment that has to be paid off, and it doesn't open the door to a quick transition to something new. But what it does open the door to is new startups that are prepared to move fast, and the talent's here, I guess the resource, the know-how is here to do it. And so being able to mobilize quickly, whether that is incumbent businesses that are able to transition fast or new startups, as I mentioned, I think is a real opportunity for the region to capitalize on. And I think just again, I can only offer a microcosm in the aviation sense, but we've been dealing now with new aircraft manufacturers for a number of years that are proposing to make new airplanes. And when we look at the flood of new startups that are coming up with innovative concepts and different ideas to solve the problem, it's overwhelming compared to the number of incumbent OEMs that, while there is a few that are doing some really awesome stuff, the large number of them are not able to deliver the timelines that the startups are proposing. And it's by no means the timelines are realistic in the short term, but that sort of weight of momentum has to occur. And I think that's where Taranaki hopefully can, really capitalize on the know-how that's here and pick up on that momentum.
Interesting, thank you. Now, Amelia, you already admitted that one of the reasons why you kind of left your industry was because of frustration. So you would be the prime example of somebody that's left and not been attracted to or retained within an industry. So would you like to add some further comments about the potential skill shortage that we're going to endure if we don't transition?
Yeah, I guess it's a really interesting dilemma, because I recently read the Tapuaeroa report in preparation for this.
Good.
Thank you. It was a long one, so I'm very proud of myself.
Okay.
No, but one thing I found really interesting was that the energy industry and oil and gas, they provide close to 30% of Taranaki's GDP. But when it comes to the percentage of population that are employed in that industry, it's a much, much smaller percentage, which actually surprised me reading that, given that, I used to be at Maui production station and there'd be, around 100, 120 people walking around. So I think as we transition into new energies, the number of people that are actually employed maybe in a single sort of new energy entity is a lot less than what's currently in traditional, oil and gas industry, for example, or other forms of generation. So I think that's going to be something that we'll have to address, because it's not just taking talent and transitioning it across, because those opportunities might not, one doesn't equal one sort of thing. I guess the other thing that I would add is that, yeah, while I've moved industries, I think it's really important just to say that oil and gas companies are indeed talking about and supported by really great, research companies, contractors. I know Worley's supporting loads of studies in the oil and gas industry to help them sort of transition. First Gas is doing a really great job. We've got Elemental sitting next to Hiringa. So there's a lot of work that's being done, and while it's not necessarily out in the open and evident to everybody at the moment, I think companies need to be very maybe deliberate in saying that actually there is going to be change happening, so that it does retain talent, so that people can say, hey, I'm in this industry and I don't have to jump out super quick, because actually there are going to be things that will change and I can be part of that.
Yeah, go Nicola.
So that made me think of something, which is that the first director of the MacDiarmid Institute, which some of you I'm sure know, was Sir Paul Callaghan. And some of you may have read Will to Wetter or Get Off the Grass, which were his books that sort of spoke about the New Zealand economy and its need to diversify. And he talked not about the income per job, but the value of a job to the economy as a whole. So, and I remember Paul going around our research institutes, and he was on a mission to educate our researchers, our scientists in New Zealand, about the need for us to think about the economic value of the science that we do. That was his mission for the last 5 to 10 years of his life. And so he'd talk about everything in the metric of hip replacements. How many hip replacements could you buy for the research income that you had been provided with by the New Zealand public as a scientist? And so how many hip replacements would a worker in a particular industry provide to the New Zealand public in the job that they were in? And so he pointed out, that the really massive difference that the nature of the industry and the scale of the industry that you work in makes to the value of the job that you do. So basic ideas about productivity, but it was pretty persuasive. And so, you know, he really managed to get across to a generation of people that it does matter what you do. You know, tourism is nice, but it doesn't make us any money, not really. It, you know, is a good place for people to work to support themselves, but does it contribute to GDP on a per person basis? Not a lot, really. It takes a lot of people and they have jobs, and jobs are good, so there's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at the places that actually increase our ability as an economy, as a society, to pay for the things that matter to us, such as our health system, which I think matters to us all, maybe more in the last 2 years than before, I'm not sure. So jobs that actually pay in terms of GDP, or perhaps there are better measures now, but there's something to think about. And so that's what I think of still when we think about talent. It's the fact that the workforce might be decreasing at the moment in terms of the number of jobs available is perhaps not the biggest issue. If the value of those jobs is significant, that's what matters, and that's what we should be prioritizing.
Thanks, Nicola. So keeping on the people theme then, Amelia, so you were also responsible for setting up the Taranaki Young Professionals, or sorry, the energy section of the Young Professionals. Do you think that we're missing an opportunity with that generation in terms of decarbonising? I think there's something we should be doing to tap into it more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think there is a huge opportunity to capitalize on young talent coming in, because just of diverse ways of thinking, difference in thought, different ways in problem solving, maybe coming out with different experience that they can add into companies. I think there's a challenge because a lot of the traditional energy companies here, no, I say a lot of, in my experience, a few of the energy companies here have, I guess, got hiring freezes on grads. And I think that's where they're not attracting grads, and grads aren't seeing them as opportunities to go join that part of the industry. And therefore, you've got a bit of a hurdle that you need to get over. But absolutely, I mean, I don't think there's a generational difference when it comes to people being passionate and having a purpose about wanting to change and decarbonize. But I certainly think that there's maybe more appetite for, I guess, taking risk to join a new industry, to join a startup, to take what might be like a slightly lower paying role with the potential that you're going to develop a skill that, that may well be a really in demand one in a few years' time. I think that comes from your sort of younger professionals. Yeah, I mean, certainly that was the case with me. If I look at 2050, for example, I'm about a third of the way of my career there. So I've got 2/3 left. And I'm pretty sure that the working environment and the jobs that are there are going to be so different in 10 years, in 20 years, in 25 years. Hopefully it's not 25 years before I retire, but I guess the other point is that when I first started out in my career, the job I'm in now did not exist. I would have never would have heard of it. So I think it's really important to, maybe absolutely attract talent, but also maybe to sort of promote the adaptability, and to say, you might start in one area of industry or a totally different industry that's not energy, but to say that those skills are adaptable in so many different ways as we grow and as we change as an industry.
So, I mean, as we have said, we need diverse fuel sources or whatever, energy supplies. We're going to need diverse people as well to be able to run with them. And the great thing is here in Taranaki, we've got WIT already looking at the skill sets required, which is really good. And I didn't mean to mention that in the introduction. I'm going to come to the last question, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience. So that's your hint to start thinking about questions. And I'm going to throw this question to Jacob. So we haven't talked much about what the government can really do to enable this energy transition, and maybe also the local government as well. So what are your thoughts on that, please, Jacob?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and one that we grapple with quite a bit in the airline. So for us, we're going to be a technology taker of these new aeroplanes and sustainable aviation fuels, if that's what we're going to be procuring. We aren't going to be determining the scale of that production. The supply is our supply that we're going to be demanding is a drop in the ocean when you look at the global problem. So for us, looking to signal early demand is important, but I think for us, having the right ecosystem infrastructure in place here in New Zealand ahead of this aircraft technology and fuel technology coming down is globally coming down is really important. And seeing the government help in the way, whether that's resource or enabling policy or regulation. And I think for us, particularly right now, it's resource allocation to the right parts of government agencies to get on that ground level. There's the big talking and there's that level down, which are the people that really do the work that we're going to have to be working with over the next 10, 20 years to certify these different airplanes types, different fuel sources, different infrastructure standards. And I think for us, even just over the last 6 months, while we've been going through a RFI process with different aircraft manufacturers who are proposing to make zero emissions aircraft, the scale of regulation change is quite overwhelming when you delve into the little details that are quite easy to gloss over. But when you dig into the New Zealand rule sets around aviation, it's a real challenge, which I guess we have to balance against the fact that aviation is the most safest form of transport. And there's a real tension between pushing for innovation and rapid movement of an absorption of new technology against the tried and true, I guess, structures and frameworks that have made it what it is today. So I think having resource where resource counts is going to be really critical. And then when I look at that energy ecosystem here in New Zealand, I think having open dialogue, private-public partnerships where we're able to share information in a way where there is trust and honesty around what both parties are after, and there is a shared goal that is greater than economic profit. It's decarbonising New Zealand, trying to set New Zealand up for future generations. Actually having a dialogue between government and private business, I think is critical to achieving that.
Oh, thanks. And I think, one of the great things about having Megan Woods online for the Offshore Energy Forum was that she did make a commitment to look at the legislation for the offshore wind, which, we've been promoting a lot here in Taranaki. So it's a different industry to you, obviously, in that, structures that go out to sea, whether it be in the form of wave or wind, will interfere with marine shipping. So, again, like the airline industry, all these things have to be thought through. It's complex. It just is not straightforward. And it's going to be hard. So, okay, did anyone else want to ask anything? Yeah, okay, I got the hint from you, Nicola. Just prolonging the audience, asking random questions, aren't you?
Oh no, I love audience questions, but I did think there was one thing that really came to mind while Jake was speaking, and that's that the government has a really massive role when it comes to education. And I think education is a big part of this. I've already said my reckon is that the physical science is not the challenge. It's the change of behavior that's going to be required, the community acceptance of change, and the fact that that change is going to impact on people inequitably. And I think government has a massive role to play in mitigating that, and we should expect it to. I'll keep it that short.
Thank you. Well, you don't get much warning now. So we're going to open up the floor, and I'm just going to check in with Lauren. The people online Zoom, are they going to type into the chat box? So we'll do one from the floor, then if we've got one from Zoom, we'll ask that. So if you've got a question, shout it out loudly, and then I will repeat it so the people on Zoom can actually hear the question. So have we got anybody that would like to ask the panel any questions? Yes, sir. Okay, so for the Zoom people, we've got a concern that the infrastructure doesn't exist to be able to move forward, and things that are being built at the moment taking forever. We can't connect them in. So, Amelia, I think you're going to answer that.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I mean, I think part of the solution is building the infrastructure yourself. So an example with Hiringa is we're a vertically integrated company. We're looking at how we can produce hydrogen, but we're also looking at how we can produce it green. So we're creating our own renewable electricity generation by building a wind farm to be able to do that. And as well as that, we're also building a refueling infrastructure across the country. So I think a lot of companies that are looking at new tech are looking at how they can basically make it economic to do it all themselves until, you know, there's infrastructure that you can then share with I guess the rest of the companies. There's obviously challenges associated with that, but I think, you know, that's probably a way to start. It's almost like you're kind of decentralizing everything around your energy systems. You're decentralizing your electricity production and decentralizing your fuel production. And by doing that, it makes it more sort of bite-sized and doable, I guess.
Then how is it going to all connect up? Then if you've got to have it all interspersed would be a question I'd have. And, you know, who's going to manage the oversight? Maybe you don't have to answer it. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe that's part of it being sort of decentralized, is that if you're looking at, for example, I'm using the example of hydrogen because it's obviously what I know, but biofuels is probably similar. I mean, it's probably the same as you would have a normal, I guess, petrol station. So you might end up with competing companies that are also producing hydrogen or biofuels. But yeah, I guess it's sort of working together with them as well.
Jacob, you look like you were.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because I think it's a really good call out. And for us, you know, we're staring down the barrel of a domestic fleet by 2050 that's going to be relying on an energy infrastructure system and energy sources that don't exist today. And they're going to be sourced almost entirely from here in New Zealand, right? Whether that's the production of green hydrogen or the production of renewable energy, recharging batteries. It is a huge undertaking for us to view how we scale that infrastructure. But and it is only talk to date, but if anything, since we have gone public with some of our ambitions, which is not something that we have done around this technology before, since we have gone public, it's been really overwhelming, the flood of offers for support from international companies that are doing incredible work to come here in New Zealand, to come to New Zealand, because they view it as a sort of an opportunity to lead the deployment of technology, whether that's through the use of our renewable energy, which we know has to scale, but it's already here. The government, while it has its challenges, to date has been quite supportive of aerospace technology. And so they have seen some of the early signals around that potentially carrying on. And I think also just about us is our domestic network, talking specifically about New Zealand, is very condensed. So you can deploy this new technology faster than where you could in, say, the US or Europe, where flights tend to be longer. So I think the opportunity is there for New Zealand if there's a lot of international and domestic, you know, momentum. I think we just need to capitalize on it and turn around some of that traditional, you know, lag of infrastructure development and pick up on this wave of momentum.
Thank you. Lauren, have we got any online questions before I go back to the audience here? Do you want, if you just take the microphone, you're more than welcome. This is Lauren from Venture Taranaki, who's been organising this for you.
The first question maybe actually links into the previous one, so that we might go with that. Should the government set the rules? Should it incentivize the outcomes it wants? Should it directly invest in the outcomes it wants? Or should it be hands off and let the private sector drive the outcomes? Perhaps there's a link with the infrastructure.
I can start just
okay,
from
go
the
for
aviation one, because this is a passionate one of ours with, say, the use of sustainable aviation fuel as a great example. So we recognize sustainable aviation fuel as the biggest decarbonisation lever we have available today. If we wanted to refuel the whole fleet tomorrow with sustainable aviation fuel, we couldn't get enough global supply. There's not enough made. And aviation as an industry is hanging its hat on that as something that scales up over time, because we'll need it to decarbonise longer range flights. And so we look at here in New Zealand, despite all of the ambition we have to buy this fuel, it's currently really limited in supply. And then given that, it's also quite expensive compared to Jet A1, especially if we want to get it here in New Zealand and import it or produce it locally. So for us, how do we scale up the use of that fuel when, if we were to do it today, we would be paying a significant price premium and having to pass some of that cost on to customers, drive up price, and what's stopping the consumer going and traveling with the other airline that's choosing to offer cheaper fares. And so leveling the playing field to us is critical to allowing the adoption of this technology. We're not asking for subsidies, we're not asking for it to be paid for, we're just asking for some sort of policy guidance to level the playing field so that we can all adopt this technology faster than what market, the free market may allow it to do.
I was just going to take that because I think it's really important that it's not necessarily about government deciding what the rules are, but there needs to be a setting of rules, which is just to say that there needs to be consistency. That's what everybody needs in order to be able to operate and have some predictability. And so there's a role there, but presumably, hopefully, it should be very much informed by what industry actually needs in order to do what it's trying to do.
Thanks, Nicola. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah. 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 So I suppose the question is around, there's a big demand on energy. There isn't the infrastructure in place, and the energy sources that we have are still our fossil fuel industries. We're still relying on them to be able to power up what we want to use today. Any comments from the panel on that?
I guess just a couple of quick comments on it, because you're absolutely right. The grid infrastructure is the huge limiting factor here, especially when you're starting to look at offshore wind, for example. There's nowhere to export it. Hence, I guess the need to look in the next sort of 25 years, and that's what we're looking at for 2050, to decentralize. I think, as Joanna mentioned, there's a huge amount of work done on by Venture Taranaki on Power to X. And I think that's one way that we can look at decarbonising, where you're generating your electricity to create your immediate sort of fuel or energy need right there. I also think there's some great startups in Taranaki that are looking to do that. Energy Bank is one. I don't fully understand their technology, but I know they're looking at sort of energy storage. I know PowerCo, I think, has also been looking at that quite significantly. And I guess the other one is also Hiringa, where with hydrogen, it's not a immediate, you don't have to deal with an immediate demand. So you can store your hydrogen and so electrolyze and store it, and then it can be available at any sort of time for fueling an airplane, for example, or a car or a truck. So I think there is certainly there are technologies out there that are going to enable it, but it's how quickly that happens that's going to be the key.
And that's probably the frustration of
I'd love to
people.
I'd love to follow up on that. I think my answer to it is just everything all at once, because everything gets easier the more, and it's slightly counterintuitive. I think there's been a lot of time wasted with people arguing about which form of energy transmission or storage or whatever else is most efficient, and people arguing about hydrogen because, oh, you've got to produce the hydrogen and that's not very efficient, and then you've got to transport it, and there are losses everywhere. But that's just the second law of thermodynamics. You can't get around it. You've just got to suck it up. There are losses everywhere. Nothing is completely efficient. The way biology gets around it is by not being efficient at all. Photosynthesis is far less efficient than any solar cell. But plants just make lots of leaves and they cope. So sometimes you just have to get on and do the things and use imperfect storage mechanisms. Put things in place now, start using them. We'll get better ones over time. But the system failure, I think at the moment, is just because everything's a bit sparse and disconnected. And the more we do, more at the same time, I think we'll fill in those gaps. And then we'll learn to get better at it. But we have to start. And yeah, the perfect is a bit the enemy of the good. And I think that's really the key thing that's holding us back.
But I suppose the problem is that we are all living in this energy transition, and we've had a lot thrown at us recently, and the energy transition for people that are running businesses or trying to get things done in their own world. We just got to work together. And that's something that I think Taranaki is really good at. We do work together when there's a problem. We come together and we work together. And I encourage you to continue doing that, to keep us on the energy map, as someone has already said earlier this evening. Now, I saw a lot of hands go up, so I'll see if I can take maybe 2 more questions from the floor here. This gentleman at the front, please. And do you mean in terms of biomass? Yeah. So the question is around biomass and what do we see as the barriers of all of this coming together and to be used? Even Nicola's taking a big deep breath. Amelia's going to give it a go.
I mean, this is called I'm going to play the Joker card because this is called a conversation. I can't comment on biomass. All I can say is that maybe someone from a consultancy like Wally might be able to tell us whether there's any studies being done, or if there's someone from Becca as an example.
Nicola, you want to comment on that?
I'll have a go, which is just to say, I think we're very focused on energy here tonight. And I believe there's another conversation that will be happening around agriculture, for example. And I do think that there is a bit of an issue around how these things might be in competition with each other, especially if you start talking about biofuel production and the role that that has in energy and the competition that that's going to come up against food production, especially in a world where the natural resource, which is to say land that's not under threat from climate change, and even if it's not about making land unfarmable, it's about changing what can be farmed there, perhaps. So it's going to be all those changes of land use that are going to really impact on the productivity that that land's going to have. And I think just that
You might not the microphone.
No, I'm back. There we go. I think one of the biggest challenges having these conversations in separate silos, which also I think we need to do for the moment, but one of the biggest things is that we're going to have to figure out how these things come together and not think about everything in isolation. It's going to be, this is what the energy lens tells us we should be doing with, biomass, but then we have to think about food. We have to think about the other uses. Yeah, I don't know. That's my best attempt at an answer. Sorry.
And I by no means claim to be a biofuel expert, but I think for us, Nicola, your point before about everything all at once is kind of resonated. I think it is, we have an opportunity here with biomass in New Zealand, whether that's, you know, forestry waste that we're using to repurpose, or we have resource here that we can use. And yes, it has trade-offs, but what is the trade-off that we're making it against? Is it against the status quo? Is it against a future problem? And I think every bit of, you know, decarbonisation potential we can unlock in the short term, yes, it might have its limitations over the long term, but I think there is a role for it in our decarbonisation pathways through to 2050. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I saw a hand right at the I'll come back to you. I saw a hand at the back there. Sorry, I shouldn't be pointing. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah.
I'm going to hand this
Okay.
straight back to Jake, because I'm going to say one of the biggest things I think that distinguishes us from a lot of places overseas is the role of aviation in connecting us with the rest of the world.
Technology problem here.
Oh, there we go. I'm back. And so while I agree that, like, at least in the last few decades, we've been able to be smug about the percentage of renewables, I think that's going to disappear. And I think aviation in particular, just our isolation from the rest of the world, will be a big challenge. And I think that's actually going to be quite motivating, which is why I'm going to hand back to Jake.
So just before Jake answers, so hopefully the people on Zoom can still hear us. We've had a problem with the technology at this end, the lack of electricity supply, believe it or not. The question that we had was around demand side and consumers, and I think Jacob's going to answer that.
Yeah, I think it is a really good question, one that it almost depends who you talk to right now. It's not something we have tested and learned from. If we were to have this debate with some of our networks team and we spoke about putting the fares up on our routes because people were more willing to pay more for green transport, they would discount that. They know demand elasticity and they know how sensitive travel is to price. But I think when you look at the future and how the impacts of climate change start to layer over people's perceptions and how they choose to travel and where they choose to put their money, I think that current paradigm is going to change. As well, it's easy to think about it in the retail sense, in terms of our retail customers choosing to, buy tickets to visit family, friends, relatives, come to Taranaki for a great night out, potentially, so I've heard. But when you think about the corporate side, I think that's where there's even more momentum to, walk the talk rather than just talk it. And aviation, for so many corporates here in New Zealand, they use travel to connect with the world, so many international partners, and they also connect with each other in ways that the roading system and rail system can't do. So if there is an opportunity to travel in a way which is lower carbon, I see that as a real opportunity for us to potentially do things faster than the rest of the world, offer something that hopefully the price point doesn't have to remain high forever. And I think there is a real opportunity that the price point should come down domestically if this technology matures the way it's promised to. So great question, and one I wish we could answer now, but I think it's a matter of who you talk to.
And, on the demand side, if people were more efficient, and I think there's a gentleman mentioned about changing your light bulbs. The problem is, if you change your ceiling lights, you have to change out the whole, in some cases you have to change out the whole light fitting, and that costs people money and they don't want to spend money on it. Whereas Air New Zealand have just said with their NZ0, we all need to carry lighter bags so the airplane isn't as heavy. but we've got to persuade people to do that, to make those changes, which I think, Nicola, you were alluding to. There was somebody down here wants to speak. I'm going to let you do that, and then we'll take one more question online, then I need to close it off. Otherwise, we won't have the opportunity to go and buy some food and drinks from Mike's brewery. So if you're going to respond, you want to do it on here, then you can, otherwise I'll have to repeat it.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. So there is a simple answer here to all of these questions, and it's a carbon price signal. And we're finally now as a world listening to the consensus of scientists, but there's actually been a consensus of economists now for decades on pollution and decades on acting on greenhouse gases, and that's to introduce a sufficient carbon price to drive change. And it sort of, let me sort of turn this into a question to the panel now, is why aren't we here talking about the need for political will to drive that? It is the straightforward answer. It'll drive, I mean, I'm all for collaboration. You know, we work with clients all over the world. There's a great momentum now of investors, financiers, industry, consumers kind of rallying, but no one in those four groups is really saying, but we still need political will. We still need, action on this along the lines of a price signal. I know there's one here, but just lastly on this, the World Bank did a study in 2019. Only 1% of global emissions are subject to a carbon price that's anywhere near consistent with the change that'll be required to get anywhere near net zero by 2050, right? So we've all signed up to COP26 and earlier the Paris Agreement, but we're not on the trajectory. There's a lot of goodwill, but it's just falling way short. And there's a straightforward answer. I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panel like to comment on that?
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point. And I think we are lucky in some respects here in New Zealand to have a carbon price that has a cap and trade system that is at least functioning, which is better than say our neighbours. But I think, yeah. That wasn't a dig, but actually that was quite a good dig if I had have dreamt that up in advance. Yeah. But I think you're right. That's a starter. If we look at passing those costs on, because we couldn't absorb those costs ourselves, I guess the question I would have back would be, what does that do for New Zealand in terms of its access to international markets, both for trade and people, and then connecting as well? So if we were to pass that cost directly on, could the New Zealand economy continue to travel, continue to connect with the world? Potentially not. I think that's a big question that needs to be answered. I think free market forces would certainly drive the transition to a low carbon economy, but I think it would have secondary impacts across New Zealand that I don't think could be quantified in one answer.
I'm going to try to respond to that though, because I think it's a really interesting question. And the opposite version of that question would be, what would it enable? And I think what it would enable is, would it enable more startups to actually be testing technologies that only become competitive if carbon is costed properly? And if you do that, does that give New Zealand a competitive advantage compared to the rest of the world? And does it give a few startups the opportunity to get ahead of the game and to start exporting before other countries are in a position to do so? That would be my question. I don't think it's an answer, but that's my question. That's maybe.
Great food for thought though, right, Amelia?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add one comment that what it enables, say, in traditional industry is that I guess projects to decarbonize become, I guess, more economic to be able to invest in them in the first place. So just from experience in oil and gas, a lot of the sort of lower hanging fruit projects that we were looking at, obviously the economics also was based on the carbon price. And if that was higher, there would have been a lot more urgency to be able to do that. So certainly it will enable quite a bit. And it's a really, really, really valid point. I mean, in terms of government, what else they can do is, policy. One of the things that we're looking at is there's the road user charge exemption for EVs, which we've currently got on trucks, but potentially would be really useful for us to have on trailers as well to help make our hydrogen price sort of competitive with diesel. So yeah, plenty of opportunity there. But I guess maybe that kind of sums up a lot of the discussion that we've been having, is that policy and regulation is kind of lagging in terms of enabling, but what we're seeing here in Taranaki, and I think in the rest of the country, is that we're also just doing, and there's a lot of doers here. And certainly there's a lot of startups that if we waited for everything to be debated and if we waited for the government's strategy to come out, yeah, we wouldn't be as far as we are now. So I think really it just comes down to getting it done.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm very, very conscious of time because Ron, who's behind the bar there, has very kindly closed the place down to the public, and he is going to be letting them in 5 minutes. So apologies. I did say I was going to take another question from online, but we really have run out of time. I've run way over, but I thought the conversation was really interesting. And apologies to those in the room as well for not asking more questions. Wow. So that was very informative. Thank you, panel, for everything that you've given us today. We've heard about diversity, complexity, speed, infrastructure. Someone needs to put their arms around the whole world and sort all of this out. I don't know who that person is. It isn't one person I know, but how on earth are we going to do it? I don't know. Eat it like a mammoth in small bite-sized pieces. But we've got to make sure that all those pieces are connected up, as has been pointed out by a number of people today. So from me, first of all, I would like to thank the panelists for coming here this evening and talking to us. Much appreciated. I'd like to thank all of the audience, whether you're online, on Zoom, or you've been in here. Thank you for coming to get involved in the Taranaki conversation on energy. We need to keep it going. There's still lots more we can do. We do need to stay positive. We need to think of solutions. We know there are plenty of problems out there, but I really encourage you to think of solutions. And if you want to know more about what Venture Taranaki has been working on and getting involved, please make sure you work with Lauren and Conrad, who have organized all of this. They've got, there's a number of pamphlets on your tables of material that's already been produced by Venture Taranaki as part of the Taranaki 2050 roadmap. And we've got many copies on the table at the front here. So see Lauren and Conrad for that. And last but not least, I want to thank Ron and the team at Mike's Brewery. We couldn't have done this without you. Much appreciated. And the bar will be open as soon as I shut up, so I'll keep this short. You know, and they serve food as well, and you've already had some delicacies, so please, I encourage you to support Mike, if not this evening, any other night of the week. I'm sure they're open 7 days a week, and Mike will give you the opening hours, or you can find them online. So before you leave, as you walk out, let's recycle our name badges, unless you really want to keep it. Keep the paper piece, but give the plastic piece back to Eve at the front there. And any other of those little tags that you might have received as you walked in, please hand those back as well. So with that, I'm going to formally close the evening, and we're going to run a karakia, which Conrad is going to lead us off on to close.
Thank you. And as always, if you know this karakia, please join along. Uni here, uni here, uni here, ki te uru tapunui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, te wairoa, I te ara takatu. Koira e rongo, whakaria, aki ki ronga. Kia wātia, aira, kua wātia, ho, paimarie.
Thank you very much. We are officially closed. Thanks very much.